Welcome aboard RDC-3. I'm Mary Lou Hedstrom, a volunteer at the museum. As most of you are aware, we were just recently listed on the National Registry of Historic Places, and we are so excited about this, and we are one of 7 aircraft that have the designation of a historical place. Our pilots today are Norm Wingler, who is president of the museum, and Clyde Zellers, who is our director of operations. Lovely lady in the air and traveling. We have brochures and all. I'm glad to meet you after our flight. I hope you enjoy it. It's fantastic. And like Lisa said, they don't have to ask me twice if I want to go. But welcome aboard.
Let me know. I'll just call John. No, but you get beer nuts.
On movie, 8mm, I think, with Connie Stark.
Really?
Belching smoke out there. I'm sitting there and taking it out the window. That thing really belches smoke too.
This gentleman flies with Connie.
Yeah, I know.
Do you know if you got a chance to talk to him?
Oh yeah. Like I said, I used to work for Ozark.
Oh, really?
I worked on these things for 20-some years.
Wow.
That's
We could have used you.
I know. We live clear in Chicago.
Uh-oh.
They talk to the pilots up here and tell them when they can go. If you look in the pockets in front of your seats, there's some old magazines you might be interested in.
Quite a few commuters, surprisingly enough. I'd rather fly through over here. Yeah, it was supposed to be in Champaign also. And, yeah, full of 50s. Man. Bill, and of course Shockwave, and Terry Clanley. Yes, his big 17 this year. He had his big 15 up there when they flew up in the tower.
Yeah.
It was a real nice night show this year.
We have a night show every year. On Friday night before the...
Yeah, this year was the first year that it was open to the public.
Oh, yeah.
Usually it's VIP. Yeah, this year was first year, and
Yeah, if it's over next year, we'll take it down.
it's $10 a ticket, and they have an auction. Various other things going on too. But it went over very well. We only sell 1,000 tickets for the night show. We made 50,000. So you're out here on an airport property at night. Yeah, yeah.
here, and so things weren't gutted, but they were pretty shaky up front there and stuff. So I'd like to bring it back down. Yeah, rare chance to be on one of the most significant ones. A lot of others are more glamorous, but this one, yeah. Acts like he knows what he's done before.
Yeah, I think they've got it down pretty well.
really bad.
We'll look at these at home and we'll bounce them down in the family.
Funny how that tail wheel thing does that.
Yeah.
Chop up the over.
Kind of landed I like that you're down before you ever know it.
Yeah, that was very nice. Did you like that?
Yes.
It's still kind of hard to picture the C-47s with a Jeep in here.
Yeah. You got that right.
Biggest thing they
I've
can
seen
put
some
in.
of my dad's
Yeah.
pictures, and I just still can't imagine all that stuff.
How did they get off the ground, you know? Well, that was really smooth flying, I tell
Yes, it
you.
was.
She's a fine lady, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure is.
It's the wingspan is bigger than DG now. Doug.
Does it really?
Oh, yeah.
She was parked next to my 9 out here at the show.
Yeah.
We thank you all
Oh, gee.
for flying down.